For just a moment, I want you to imagine something with me. Imagine you were given the most incredible machine ever created. It could repair itself, adapt to any environment, fight off infections, heal broken bones, create life, store energy for later, and run for decades without ever needing to be replaced. Now imagine that instead of reading the owner's manual, you spent your entire life listening to millions of people who all had different opinions about how it worked. One person tells you, eat 6 times a day. Another says, never skip breakfast. Someone else insists that carbohydrates are the enemy. Another swears that fat's the problem. One expert says that fasting is dangerous, and another says you should be doing it more often. One study makes headlines, the next one seems to say the opposite, so after a while, you don't even know what to believe anymore. For many people, that's exactly how health feels today. It's confusing, overwhelming, even discouraging when you make an effort to try. We're surrounded by more health information than at any other time in human history. Thousands of podcasts, millions of YouTube videos, social media posts, news headlines, books, supplements, influencers, experts, advertisements. Everyone seems certain that they have the answer. They found it. Yet, I know, despite having more information than ever before, a lot of people, many people feel worse than ever before. We're exhausted. We're overwhelmed. Many of us are carrying extra weight that we never wanted. Others are struggling with blood sugar problems, autoimmune diseases. That's me. Inflammation, digestive issues, brain fog, poor sleep, constant cravings, low energy. And while every person's story is different, it really is, many of us quietly ask the same question. Why doesn't my body seem to work the way that it's supposed to? Or like it maybe used to, if it ever did feel good? I know that feeling, not because I read about it, it's because I've lived it. Years ago, I sat in a neurologist's office after quite a period of frightening symptoms. I had numbness, weakness, changes in my balance, questions that no one seemed able to answer. And after what felt like an endless wait, the neurologist began recognizing more symptoms and checking my reflexes and watching my walk and reviewed, well, had me do an MRI and then reviewed it, of course, and gently explained that the images showed multiple lesions in the brain and upper spinal cord. I had multiple sclerosis. I was still a young wife, a young mom, only like 20, 21. And I remember looking at my little baby girl and wondering, what is our future going to look like? The neurologist was compassionate. She wasn't trying to scare me. She was explaining what medical knowledge suggested at the time. And this would have been about 20 years ago. So, based on what she saw, she believed there was a good chance that over the coming years, I would experience significant disability. I left that appointment carrying something so much heavier than a diagnosis. I carried fear. Fear that my future had already been decided. Fear that I might lose my independence. Fear that I might not be the mother that I wanted to be. And if you've ever received a diagnosis, you probably understand what I mean. Sometimes it's not just the illness, it's the story you begin telling yourself afterward. It's the future you suddenly imagine. It's the feeling that your body has somehow become your enemy. For a while, I believed that story. But over time, another question quietly began growing inside of me. What if my body isn't my enemy? What if my body isn't fighting against me? What if it's trying to protect me? And that question changed so much, not overnight. And not because I found one miracle answer. It's not because I discovered one perfect diet. And certainly not because I believe fasting is a cure for every disease. It's really powerful, but it's not a cure for everything. It did, though, change everything because it completely changed the way that I looked at the human body. And instead of asking, how do I force my body to behave? I started asking, what is my body trying to tell me? And that one shift in perspective, it set me on a journey that has now lasted a couple decades. I became a certified health coach. I spent countless hours reading scientific papers and research and learning physiology, studying nutrition and exploring metabolism and understanding hormones, looking at inflammation and trying to understand why our bodies do what they do. Now, some ideas turned out to be supported by really strong evidence. Other ideas I came across sounded exciting but didn't hold up to closer examination. And still others remain areas where scientists are actively learning more every year. But one topic that kept appearing again and again, not because it was trendy, but because it kept showing up across history, across cultures, across religions, across anthropology, and increasingly across modern scientific research. Fasting. At first, I thought fasting was simply about not eating. Honestly, I assumed it was mostly something people did for weight loss or religious reasons. I had no idea that by temporarily stepping away from food, our bodies begin shifting through a series of beautifully coordinated biological processes that have been part of human physiology for as long as we've existed. And the more I learned, the more one thought just kept coming back to me. Maybe, maybe fasting isn't strange at all. Maybe what's strange is that we've almost completely removed it from modern life. Think about this. For nearly all of human history, food wasn't available every few hours. It just wasn't. There were seasons of abundance, there were seasons of scarcity, and people naturally experienced periods between meals that were much longer than what many of us experience today. The human body didn't evolve expecting constant eating. It evolved expecting periods of eating and periods without eating, periods of work and periods of rest, periods of activity and periods of recovery. Nature is full of rhythms, day and night, summer and winter. Breathing in, breathing out, your heartbeat, even sleep follows a rhythm. Everything in creation seems to move through cycles of activity and restoration. Yet when it comes to food, many of us unknowingly stepped out of that rhythm. We've been taught that we're almost always supposed to be eating something. Breakfast, snack. Coffee break, another snack. Lunch, protein bar, another snack. Dinner, dessert, late night snack. Before we know it, our bodies are spending nearly every waking hour processing food. And that raises an important question. What happens when our bodies never get a chance to simply rest? That's the question this video is about, and a new book I'm about to publish. I actually have it almost complete, so keep an eye out for it. And when it's done, I'll put a link in the description below. Now, fasting, it's not about magic. It's not because it's the answer to every problem, but fasting is powerful because I will say understanding fasting helps us understand something even bigger. It helps us to understand the incredible design of the human body itself. And once you begin to understand that design, you stop seeing your body as a broken enemy that's trying to hurt you. You begin seeing it as intelligent, responsive, adaptive, resilient, and perhaps far more capable than you've ever allowed yourself or been led to believe. So before we talk about fasting, before we discuss meal timing, before we talk about ketones, autophagy, insulin, or fat metabolism, we need to begin with something much more important. Because if we misunderstand the body, we'll misunderstand everything else. So let's start at the beginning. Let's talk about one of the biggest misconceptions in modern health. It's the idea that your body is constantly working against you, because I don't believe that's true. I believe your body has been speaking to you all along for your whole life. The question is, have we learned how to listen? All right, so for part one, we're going to discuss understanding the language of your body. One of the greatest misunderstandings I see in health today is this idea that our bodies simply fail. Didn't work. You failed. Your body failed. Too bad. We wake up exhausted. We assume our body failed. We gain weight. We assume our body has betrayed us. Our blood pressure rises and our blood sugar changes and we develop chronic inflammation. We struggle with sleep. Our hormones shift. Our energy disappears. Our joints hurt. Our digestion changes. And naturally, we ask, what's wrong with my body? I understand that question. I've asked it myself. But over the years, I've started asking a different question. Why is my body doing this? Those are very different questions, my friend, because when we ask what's wrong, we immediately assume the body made a mistake. But when we ask why, we begin looking for purpose. Now, I want to be very careful here. I'm not saying every disease has a simple explanation, and I'm not saying every illness is reversible. And I'm certainly not suggesting that if someone is sick, it's because they did something wrong. Life is much more complicated than that. Genetics matter, age matters, environmental exposures matter. Access to healthcare matters. Infections matter. Trauma matters. There are many things that we cannot control, but there is also something that we often overlook. Our bodies are constantly adapting to the environment that we give them. Think about what happens when you walk outside on a hot summer day. You begin sweating. Most of us don't panic. We don't say, oh no, my body is leaking water. No, of course not. We understand what's happening. Sweating isn't the problem. Sweating is the solution. Your body is trying to cool itself. The symptom isn't the enemy. It's communication. Now imagine you're outside on a freezing winter day and your body starts shivering. Again, you don't assume something is broken. You understand. Shivering is your muscles generating heat. It's your body's way of protecting you. Or think about a fever. For years, we've often viewed fever as something to eliminate as quickly as possible. Yet a fever is often part of the body's coordinated response to infection. Again, the body isn't acting randomly. It's responding. The human body is constantly making adjustments, thousands of them, every second, long before you're aware of them. Your heart changes speed depending on what you're doing. Your lungs adjust. Your breathing, your kidneys carefully regulate fluids and electrolytes. Your liver stores and releases energy. Your pancreas constantly monitors your blood sugar. Hormones rise and fall throughout the day. Your immune system patrols for threats that you've never even noticed. This incredible orchestra is happening while you're watching this video. You don't have to think about it. Your body already knows. And sometimes I think we've forgotten just how remarkable the human body really is. We often notice it only when something goes wrong. But every single day, your body performs millions of coordinated tasks designed to keep you alive. Not because it hates you, it's because it's trying to protect you. That realization can change how you view your health. It did for me. Instead of asking, why is my body doing this to me? Like I said earlier, what is my body responding to? Why is this happening? That question opened an entirely new way of thinking because here's something we sometimes forget. Your body does not speak English. It doesn't speak Spanish. It doesn't speak French. It speaks biology. It communicates through symptoms, through chemistry, through hormones, through energy levels, through hunger, through sleep, through inflammation, pain, temperature, through countless signals designed to get your attention. Imagine someone trying desperately to reach you. They send a text, you ignore it. They call, you silence your phone. They knock on the front door, you pretend you're not home. Eventually, they're gonna knock louder. Not because they dislike you, it's because they're trying to communicate something important. Sometimes I wonder if our symptoms are a little bit like that. Our bodies whisper long before they shout. Maybe fatigue is one whisper. Maybe constant cravings are another. Maybe poor sleep or digestive discomfort. Low energy, difficulty concentrating, persistent inflammation. Again, these symptoms don't automatically tell us what exactly is wrong. Symptoms can have many different causes. That's why proper medical evaluation is so important when something serious is happening. But symptoms often tell us something equally important. They tell us our body is responding to something. The body is incredibly intelligent. It's not perfect, but it's incredibly intelligent. And that brings us to one of the biggest themes in this entire video and in my upcoming book. Health isn't simply about treating symptoms. It's about becoming curious about what our bodies are responding to. And that's a much different mindset. If smoke starts coming out from under the hood of your car, you could tape over the warning light. You could disconnect the alarm. You could even remove the dashboard completely. The warning, it would disappear, but the engine would still be overheating. The warning wasn't the problem, it was information. Now, our bodies are far more complex than cars. This analogy has limits, but I think the principle is still helpful. Sometimes we've become so focused on silencing the message that we never ask why the message appeared in the first place. And that's one of the reasons I became so interested in nutrition and sleep and stress and movement and sunlight and relationships and fasting. Not because any one of those things magically fixes every problem, but because all of them become part of the environment our body responds to. Think about a houseplant sitting beside a window. If the leaves begin turning yellow, you don't usually assume the plant is defective. You ask questions. Is it getting enough water? Too much water? Enough sunlight? Is the soil healthy? Has the temperature changed? You're looking at the environment. Human beings are much more complicated than plants, but we also live within environments. The foods we eat, the amount we eat, how often we eat, the quality of our sleep, our stress levels, our movement, the amount of time we spend outside, our relationships, even our thoughts can influence our physiology in remarkable ways. None of these alone explain every illness, but together they create the environment our bodies are constantly responding to. One of the things that surprised me most while researching for this video series and my book was realizing how many modern habits are incredibly new, not hundreds of years old. sometimes only a few decades. Think about it. Electric lighting, 24-hour food availability, ultra processed foods, constant snacking, endless notifications, late night screen time. Many of these are conveniences. Some are incredible advancements. I'm thankful for modern medicine. I'm thankful for antibiotics, emergency surgery, vaccines, image technology. Countless medical breakthroughs have saved millions of lives, including those of my own children. My youngest son, who's about to turn 14, is only alive today because of the miracle of modern medicine. I could do a whole video about my experiences with him as a baby and some of the struggles that we went through. But here he is at 14 and doing pretty well. He's got a broken ankle from his fun trampoline activity, but he's alive and he's well. And because of modern medicine, he has a very nice cast on that broken ankle. This isn't a rejection of modern medicine. It's an invitation to broaden the conversation. What if, alongside excellent medical care, we also asked, how can I better support the incredible systems my body already has? That question is what eventually led me somewhere unexpected. Because the more I studied human physiology, the more I realized something fascinating. Your body wasn't just designed to process food. It was also designed to function beautifully when food isn't immediately available. That realization challenged almost everything I thought I knew. And it's the reason fasting moved from being a historical curiosity to becoming one of the central themes of this channel and my new book. But before we can understand what fasting does, we have to understand something even more fundamental: what food actually is, because food is much more than calories. It's much more than protein, much more than fat, much more than carbohydrates. Food is information. Every bite tells your body something. Every meal begins a conversation between your environment and your internal biology. And once you understand that, you're not going to be looking at eating the same way. So, for chapter 2, let's talk about that food is more than fuel. For most of my life, I thought food had one primary purpose: to give us energy. Eat food, get calories, burn calories, repeat again tomorrow. That's how most of us learn to think about nutrition: calories in, calories out, keep it balanced. And while calories absolutely matter, that explanation is far too simple. It's a little like saying a smartphone is just like a flashlight. Hmm. Technically, it can be one, but that's nowhere close to the whole story. Food is much more than fuel. Food is information. Like I said, every bite is beginning a conversation inside your body. So imagine someone ringing your front doorbell. You don't know who it is yet, but your house immediately begins responding. Maybe the lights come on. Maybe your dog starts barking. Maybe you walk toward the door. One small event creates an entire chain of responses. Food works in much the same way. The moment food, or any kind of liquid as well, enters your mouth, your body begins preparing for what's coming. Even before you swallow, your brain is already involved. Your stomach begins preparing the digestive juices, and your pancreas starts anticipating changes in blood sugar. Hormones begin shifting, and your digestive tract starts coordinating the muscle contractions, blood flow changes, enzymes are released, signals begin traveling throughout your body. This is extraordinary. This is one bite of food, and millions of cells begin communicating with each other. Not randomly, but with incredible organization. Your body isn't simply burning food, it's interpreting it. It's asking questions. How much energy is arriving? What kind of nutrients are present? Should we store some of this? Should we release insulin? Do we need to build tissue, repair cells, store fat, release fat, grow Rest? Every meal sends instructions. Think about that for a moment. Food isn't just something your body uses, it's something your body listens to. That idea completely changed how I looked at eating. Instead of asking, how many calories does this have? I began asking, what message is this sending? Because every meal says something. A meal rich in protein communicates differently than a sugary drink. A meal full of colorful vegetables communicates differently than a highly processed snack food of some sort out of a bag. Every every food is telling you something. Eating once communicates differently than eating every 2 hours, like eating once a day, I mean, or even the absence of food communicates something. So we'll spend much more time talking about that soon. But first, let's understand something remarkable. Your body is incredibly adaptable. Imagine you're living hundreds or even thousands of years ago and you're part of a small community. There are no refrigerators, no grocery stores, no food delivery apps, no convenience stores open all night. Some days there was plenty of food to eat, and other days there just isn't. Would a species survive very long if it completely shut down every time food became scarce? Of course not. Human beings survived because our bodies adapted. When food was available, our bodies knew what to do. And when food wasn't available, our bodies also knew what to do. That's not a flaw. That's a brilliant design. Your liver stores glucose as glycogen. Your muscles store energy. Your body can access stored fat. Hormones shift, metabolism adjusts. This isn't your body malfunctioning. It's your body doing exactly what it was designed to do. One of the biggest misunderstandings I see is the belief that hunger means something has gone terribly wrong. Now, let me be clear. There are situations where someone absolutely should not ignore hunger. Children need consistent nourishment for growth. Pregnant and breastfeeding women have unique nutritional needs. Individuals recovering from eating disorders require specialized care. People with certain medical conditions or taking medications, especially those that affect blood sugar, should talk with their healthcare team before making a significant change to how they're eating. So if that's you, I'm talking to you. Those situations matter. They're important. Throughout this video, throughout my book, we'll keep returning to the idea that fasting isn't appropriate for everyone and it should be approached carefully and thoughtfully. But for many otherwise healthy adults, feeling hungry for a period of time is not automatically an emergency. Hunger is a signal, not necessarily a crisis. Think about thirst. When you feel thirsty, your body is communicating. It's saying, I'd like some water. If you don't drink immediately, your body doesn't instantly begin shutting down. It has ways of maintaining balance while you go find water. Eventually, if you never drink, that becomes dangerous. But there is a difference between receiving a signal and it being an emergency. Hunger works in a similar way. In fact, researchers have learned that hunger often comes in waves. Have you ever noticed that? That sometimes you're convinced you're absolutely starving, but you just couldn't eat, you didn't get a chance or wasn't available, and then 30 minutes later, the feeling has faded? What happened? Did your body suddenly create a full meal out of thin air? No, of course not. Your hormones shifted. One of the hormones involved is ghrelin, often called the hunger hormone. Ghrelin tends to rise around the time your body expects food. And if you normally eat lunch at noon, you may notice hunger around noon. But if you stay busy, drink water, or you simply wait, that wave often passes. That doesn't mean hunger isn't real. It means hunger is dynamic. It's influenced by biology, habit, sleep, stress, emotions, and routine, not just by how empty your stomach is. Understanding that gives us freedom, not because we want to ignore the body's signals, but because we're realizing that we don't have to be afraid of them. There's a difference. Our modern culture has become uncomfortable with almost any kind of discomfort. The moment we feel hungry or we reach for food, we feel like that's the solution. Or the moment we feel tired and we reach for caffeine, we feel that's the solution. Or the moment we're bored, we go for a snack. Or the moment we're stressed. Many of us are eating without even realizing it. Food has become far more than nourishment. It has become entertainment, comfort, celebration, distraction, habit. Again, none of those are inherently wrong. Sharing meals is one of life's greatest joys. Food brings families together. It connects generations. It carries traditions. Some of my favorite memories involve gathering around a table with people I love. This video and my book is not about making food the enemy. Quite the opposite. Food is one of God's greatest gifts. It nourishes us, strengthens us. It brings people together. But like so many good gifts, timing matters, rhythm matters, balance matters. Imagine trying to just sleep all day. Even though sleep is wonderful, too much of it at the wrong time creates problems. Imagine exercising 24 hours a day. Exercise is healthy. Constant exercise isn't. Imagine watering your garden every hour. Plants need water, but too much water can destroy them. Health is often found in rhythm. Activity, then rest. Work, then recovery. Eating, then allowing the body time to finish what it has started. The more I studied physiology, the more I realized that perhaps one of the greatest things fasting offers isn't deprivation, it's opportunity. An opportunity for the body to shift into a different biological state, a state that our ancestors experienced regularly, but many of us rarely experience anymore. That doesn't make fasting magical, it simply makes it familiar to human biology. And that brings us to one of the most important questions in this entire conversation. If food sends powerful messages, what message does the absence of food send? The answer to that question begins with one small molecule that almost everyone has heard of, but very few people truly understand: insulin. And once you understand insulin, many of the biggest mysteries surrounding fasting begin to make much more sense. So that brings us to chapter 3, understanding insulin, your body's energy traffic controller. If I could choose one topic that has probably caused more confusion than almost anything else in nutrition, it would be insulin. Some people blame insulin for everything. Others hardly think about it at all. The truth, as is so often the case in biology, is much more balanced. Insulin isn't the villain. In fact, you literally cannot live without it. Every person watching this video depends on insulin every single day. Without it, life is not possible. So let's understand what it actually does. Imagine your bloodstream is like a network of highways. Every time you eat carbohydrates, and to some extent protein as well, your digestive system breaks down food into smaller components. And one of those components is glucose. Glucose is a remarkable fuel. Many tissues in your body use it every day. Your brain relies on it for many conditions. Your red blood cells require it. Your muscles use it. Your organs use it. Glucose itself isn't bad. It's essential. But here's the challenge. Glucose is traveling in your bloodstream. The cells that need it are waiting behind locked doors. So how does glucose get inside? That's where insulin comes in. Your pancreas constantly monitors the amount of glucose in your blood. And when glucose begins rising after a meal, specialized cells in the pancreas release insulin. You can think of insulin as a messenger or maybe even as the key. It signals many cells throughout the body to begin taking glucose out of the bloodstream and using it or storing it. Without insulin, glucose remains in the bloodstream instead of entering into many of the cells that need it. So, insulin is doing something incredibly important. It's helping organize energy. It's keeping blood sugar within a healthy range. It's coordinating where nutrients go after a meal. And that's such a beautiful design. It's not a mistake. One thing I want to be careful about is avoiding oversimplified explanations. You'll sometimes hear people say things like insulin makes you fat. Mm-mm. That's not really an accurate way to understand it. Insulin is a hormone with many jobs. One of those jobs is helping the body store energy when energy is abundant. Think about that from an evolutionary perspective. If food suddenly became plentiful after a season of scarcity, wouldn't storing some energy for the future be a wise strategy? Of course it would. Body fat is not an engineering flaw. Body fat is one of the body's remarkable survival tools. For most of human history, storing energy during times of abundance increased the chances of surviving times of scarcity. The problem isn't that our bodies know how to store energy. The challenge is that many of us now live in an environment where abundance rarely ends. Imagine if you were putting groceries into your pantry every hour of every day. Eventually, you'd run out of room. It's not because storing food is bad, but because the cycle never pauses. In a similar way, modern eating patterns often keep our bodies in a nearly continuous fed state. Breakfast, snack, coffee break, snack, lunch, protein bar, or something, candy bar, maybe. Another snack, dinner, dessert, something before bed. Again, this isn't about guilt. It's about understanding. Your body simply responds to the signals it receives. Every time we eat, especially foods that rise blood glucose significantly, insulin rises to help coordinate what happens next. And that's exactly what it's supposed to do. But here's where fasting enters the picture. And we're going to talk about what happens next. So, when fasting enters the picture, when we stop eating for a period of time, eventually insulin begins to fall. And that change opens the door to a different metabolic state. Notice what I said, a different state, not a better state, not a worse state, just a different one. Your body is incredibly flexible. After a meal, it excels at processing incoming nutrients. Between meals or during longer periods without food, it shifts toward using that stored energy. Now, those are both normal parts of human physiology. One isn't good and the other bad. They're partners, like breathing in and breathing out. You need both. One of the reasons I wanted to write this book that I'm recently, actually just today, publishing on fasting, well, I'm waiting for the approval with publishers, but it will be available on Amazon. And the reason I wanted to write it was because I think we've unintentionally forgotten about the second half of the rhythm. We've become experts at eating. We've become much less familiar with allowing our bodies time between meals. Now, that doesn't mean everyone needs to do long fasts, and it doesn't mean you should skip meals without thought. It simply means it's worth understanding what your body was designed to do during those natural breaks. Now, there's another phase you've probably heard, um, or I'm sorry, phrase, not phase, and it's called insulin resistance. This is an area where it's important to avoid simplistic thinking. Insulin resistance develops through a complex combination of genetics, body composition, physical activity, sleep, nutrition, stress, aging, and just a lot of other factors. Scientists are still learning about all the mechanisms involved, but a helpful way to visualize it is to imagine trying to have a conversation in an increasingly noisy room. Now, at first, if someone speaks quietly, and everyone hears, but as the room gets louder, they have to speak more forcefully to be understood. Now, eventually, everyone is shouting just to communicate. Again, that's a simplification, but it captures an important idea. The body may need to produce more insulin to achieve the same effect under certain circumstances. Now, this doesn't happen overnight, and it isn't caused by one single food or one single meal. It's a gradual process influenced by many aspects of health. Now, the encouraging news is that lifestyle changes like improving nutrition or increasing your physical activity, like how much you move around and get exercise and getting enough sleep, like adequate sleep, at least. And for some people, under appropriate guidance, incorporating fasting, it really can play a role in improving metabolic health. Like I've said before, it's not because fasting is magic, but because it's one of the tools that can help restore a healthier rhythm. Now, the word rhythm, it keeps coming back up because rhythm is important. It's not an accident. When I look at creation, I see rhythms everywhere. The tides moving in and out, and the seasons changing, and day giving way to night. We work, we sleep, and our hearts contract, then relax. Even our breathing, it's following a pattern. Now, none of this is optional. If all we ever did was inhale, we wouldn't survive. So, health often depends on the balance between opposing but complementary processes, like the fed state, the fasting state, growth and repair, storage and release. Neither is the enemy. Both are part of how the body was designed to function. So, what actually happens when insulin begins to fall? How does the body continue supplying energy if new food isn't arriving? Does it simply panic, or does your metabolism shut off? Does your body immediately start breaking down muscle? Now, these are some of the biggest fears that people do have about fasting, and they're also some of the biggest myths because your body has been preparing for this moment all along. It has a remarkable backup system. Actually, several of them. So, the first step on that journey is something called glycogen. Think of it as your body's short term energy savings account. Before your body ever needs to rely heavily on stored fat, it first turns to the energy it already has set aside for exactly this purpose. And once you understand glycogen, the transition into fasting starts to make a lot more sense. So, for chapter 4, let's talk about your built in energy reserve and understanding this glycogen. Have you ever noticed how people prepare for the future? Like before a snowstorm, people fill up their gas tanks, they buy groceries, and they make sure they have enough supplies at home. They're not expecting disaster. They're simply preparing for a time when resources might not be immediately available. Your body does something very similar, except it has been doing it for hundreds and thousands of years. Every time you eat, your body isn't only thinking about right now, it's also preparing for later. Remember when we talked about insulin helping glucose move into your cells? Not all of that glucose gets used just immediately. Some of it is stored, primarily in two places, your muscles and your liver. Now, that stored form of glucose is called glycogen. Now, if you've never heard that word before, don't worry. You don't have to memorize it. Just think of glycogen as your body's readily available energy reserve. Imagine your kitchen. Like maybe you have fruit sitting on the counter, and that's the food you're using today. Maybe you probably also have food stored in your pantry or your freezer. It's not because you're planning to eat it this minute, but because it's there when you need it. Your liver is a little bit like that pantry. It's constantly storing and releasing energy. Now, one of the things that amazed me while researching for my book was realizing just how proactive the human body is. Your body isn't waiting until you're in trouble. It's preparing long before you even realize that you need help. It stores energy because it assumes there will eventually be a time when food isn't immediately available. This isn't a design flaw, it's wisdom. And honestly, it does make perfect sense. Our ancestors didn't have grocery stores open 24 hours a day. They couldn't order food with a phone. There were seasons, weather, travel, hunting, harvests. Sometimes they had lots of food and sometimes they didn't. Human beings survived because our bodies learned how to bridge those natural gaps. When you stop eating, your body doesn't immediately panic. It doesn't suddenly say, oh no, there's no sandwich coming, shut down everything. No. Instead, it calmly begins using what it already prepared. Your liver starts releasing glycogen back into the bloodstream. That glycogen becomes glucose, and that glucose continues helping supply energy where it's needed. Think about how incredible that is. Your body anticipated this moment before it happened. It already had a plan. That realization completely changed the way that I thought about fasting because I had always imagined that fasting meant immediately running on empty. That is not what happens. Your body has reserves. It does have options. It has systems. It has priorities. And it moves through them in a very organized way. This is one of the reasons that I encourage people not to fear every sensation of hunger. Again, there are absolutely people who should not fast without medical guidance, and we'll discuss those situations in my book and throughout these videos. But for many healthy adults, the body has remarkable ways of maintaining stability between meals in that gap. That stability is called homeostasis. You don't have to remember that word either. Just remember what it means. Your body is constantly working to keep you alive every second without asking permission, without needing reminders, without you consciously directing it. Your body is always working toward balance. If your blood sugar begins dropping, your body responds. If your body temperature changes, your body responds. If you're dehydrated, your body responds. It's always adapting, always adjusting, always working for you, not against you. That idea became one of the biggest themes of my own health journey. I stopped seeing my body as something fragile. I began seeing it as something remarkably resilient. Not invincible, but resilient. And there's a difference. Sometimes I think we underestimate ourselves. We've become so accustomed to constant comfort that we've forgotten how adaptable the human body really is. Think about professional athletes. Their bodies adapt to training. Or think about musicians. Their brains adapt to practice. Think about someone learning a new language. The brain literally changes through repetition. Our bodies are designed to adapt. And that's one of the greatest gifts that we've been given by our creator. And fasting, when practiced appropriately, takes advantage of that adaptability. But here's where things get really interesting. Eventually, those glycogen stores begin running low, not immediately, not after missing one snack, and not because you slept through breakfast. It takes time. Exactly how long depends on a lot of different contributing factors like your recent meals, your activity level, your body composition, your metabolism, your overall health. That's why you hear different numbers. Human biology isn't a stopwatch, it's wonderfully individualized. But eventually, your body begins making another shift, one that has become incredibly popular in recent years, a shift toward using stored fat more heavily for energy. This is where many conversations about fasting suddenly become exciting. People begin talking about fat burning, but I actually think that phrase can be a little misleading because your body is always using a mixture of fuels. Even when you're eating, the proportions simply change. And as fasting continues, stored fat becomes increasingly important. Fat is broken down into fatty acids, and the liver begins producing molecules called ketones. And suddenly, the body is demonstrating yet another layer of its incredible flexibility. So instead of relying primarily on recently eaten food, it's drawing from energy that has been stored for another day. Think about the elegance of that. Really think about it. Your body isn't wasting stored energy. It's using it exactly as it was intended. Sometimes people will ask, why would my body store fat if it never wanted to use it? That's a wonderful question. It wouldn't. Stored fat exists because your body fully expects there will be times when that energy becomes valuable. Body fat is not a biological accident. It is an energy reserve, like savings in a bank account. You don't save money because you hate spending it. That would be ridiculous. You save it because there will come a day when you'll need it. Your body has been making deposits year after year after year. Fasting is one of the ways the body can begin making withdrawals. Again, that doesn't make fasting superior to eating. It simply reminds us that both systems were designed to work together. And this is where I think many people have unintentionally misunderstood fasting. They imagine it's about depriving the body, but from a physiological perspective, it's actually about allowing the body to access systems that have been there all along. That's a very different way of thinking. The body isn't improvising, it's following a blueprint that was written into human biology long before any of us were born. And that naturally leads to another question. If the body begins relying more on stored fat, what exactly are ketones? Why has there been so much excitement about them? What is their connection to fats? Are they really some kind of miracle like fuel or charge for the body? Or are they simply another beautiful example of the body's remarkable ability to adapt? So let's find out. Moving on to chapter 5, we're going to talk about ketones, your brain's alternative fuel. All right. One of the reasons fasting has become so popular over the last decade is because of that word, ketones. You've probably heard someone say, my body is in ketosis or I'm burning ketones. Sometimes people talk about ketones as though they're magical, almost like flipping on a switch suddenly transforms you into a completely different person. Now, other people hear the word ketosis and they become nervous because they've heard about something called diabetic ketoacidosis. Now, those two things are not the same, and it's important not to confuse them. Nutritional ketosis, which can occur during fasting or certain diets, is a normal physiological state in many healthy people. Diabetic ketoacidosis is a serious medical emergency that most commonly occurs in people with type 1 diabetes or severe insulin deficiency. They may share part of a name, but they are different, very different conditions. So let's take away some of the mystery. Remember what we talked about in the last chapter. As your glycogen stores gradually decline, your body begins relying more heavily on stored fat for energy. Now, when fat is broken down, the liver can produce small molecules called ketone bodies, often shortened just to ketones. Now, think of ketones as an alternative fuel, not a better fuel, not a magic fuel, just another fuel your body was designed to make when conditions call for it. And I think one of the most beautiful things about the human body is that it almost always has a backup plan. Imagine your home loses electricity during a storm. Some families have a generator, and the generator wasn't installed because they wanted the power to fail. It was installed because they understood that having another source of power could be incredibly valuable. Ketones are a little like that. Your body has another source of fuel available when food isn't immediately coming in. Now, this isn't an emergency response. It's part of normal human physiology. Now, here's where things can get really interesting and really fascinating. Your brain is an incredibly energy demanding organ. And even though it only makes up a small percentage of your body weight, it uses a remarkable amount of energy every day. Most of the time, much of that energy comes from glucose, but during longer periods without food, the brain doesn't simply stop working. Instead, it begins using ketones for a significant portion of its energy needs. And that ability has fascinated scientists for decades, not because ketones are mysterious, but because they demonstrate just how adaptable the human body truly is. Think about our ancestors again. If human beings became mentally foggy and incapable of thinking every time food wasn't available, our species probably wouldn't have survived. Imagine trying to hunt, gather food, protect your family, navigate unfamiliar terrain, or make wise decisions while your brain completely shut down because lunch was delayed. That wouldn't make much sense. Instead, the body developed another strategy. Again, it's not magic, it's adaptation. Some people describe experiencing greater mental clarity while fasting. Others don't notice much difference. Now, research in this area, it's still growing and people can have very different experiences depending on their health, sleep, medication, hydration, caffeine intake, and many other factors. I think that's important to acknowledge. One of the goals of my book and this channel and these videos isn't to promise everyone that they will have the exact same experience if they just do what I say. No, I can't. That'd be silly. Human beings are wonderfully unique. We have to appreciate and respect that. But understanding why the body produces ketones helps us to appreciate the incredible flexibility built into our biology. Sometimes I hear people say your body wasn't designed to burn glucose. Now, I don't think that's accurate. Your body was absolutely designed to use glucose. Glucose is an important fuel. At other times, I hear the opposite. Your body should never be in ketosis. That also overlooks an important part of human physiology. The body was designed to use both. It isn't either or, it's both and. Once again, we find ourselves coming back to rhythm, fed, fasted, glucose, ketones, storage, release. These aren't enemies competing against one another. They're teammates. One of the biggest lessons I've learned while studying health is that biology rarely operates in extremes. Our culture often does. Biology usually doesn't. The body is constantly adjusting, balancing, responding, adapting. That's why I become cautious whenever someone claims they've discovered the one perfect diet or the one perfect supplement or the one perfect fasting schedule for everyone. Human biology is simply too complex for one size fits all answers. Instead, I think wisdom often comes from understanding principles. When you understand principles, you can apply them thoughtfully to your own life. That's one of my hopes that you'll gain from this is an understanding of this principle. In reading my book, I'm not hoping that you'll copy everything I do, and I'm not hoping that you'll fast exactly the way that I fast or just the way that I eat, but that you'll begin understanding your own body more deeply. Because once you understand the principles, you're much better equipped to make wise decisions. Now, there's another term that almost always comes up whenever people talk about fasting. In fact, it may be one of the biggest buzzwords in the fasting world right now. It's autophagy. If you've spent any time watching fasting videos online, you've probably heard someone confidently announce autophagy begins exactly 18 hours into a fast, or 24, or 36, or 48 hours. And the truth is, it's not nearly that simple. Autophagy is real. It's fascinating. It has earned scientists a Nobel Prize for helping us better understand how cells recycle and renew components. But much of what gets repeated online goes far beyond what the evidence actually shows. I think it's important that we separate genuine science from oversimplified internet claims because fasting deserves better than myths. And so do you. Let's explore what autophagy really is, what scientists know, and what they're still studying, and why this incredible process has captured so much attention around the world. So, for chapter 6, autophagy, the cell's housekeeping system. This, like I said, may be one of the most misunderstood words in the entire fasting movement. If there is one word that has almost become synonymous with fasting, I think it would be autophagy. Some people talk about it as though it's a magic switch. And I understand why people try to recommend like a certain amount of hours or a specific way because it's simple and easy to remember. But the problem is, biology is rarely that simple. One of the promises I made to myself while writing my book on fasting was that I would never exaggerate the science just because it sounded exciting. The truth is already amazing. It doesn't need embellishment. So, what is autophagy? The word itself comes from Greek. It literally means self eating. Now, don't let that phrase scare you. Your body is not eating itself in the way people often imagine. A much better picture is this: imagine your house every day. Things accumulate: broken toys, old paperwork, worn out clothes, empty boxes, dust. If you never cleaned your home, eventually it would become difficult to live there. Not because the house is bad, it's just because clutter can accumulate and make it just impossible. Living cells face a really similar challenge. Proteins wear out, small cellular structures become damaged, waste products build up, parts become old. The cell doesn't simply ignore those things. It has systems designed to identify components that are no longer functioning well, break them down, and recycle many of the building blocks and use them again. Isn't that incredible? Like your cells are constantly maintaining themselves. Long before scientists gave this process a name, your body had already been doing it. This is one reason I become so fascinated by biology. Again and again, we discover that the body is far more intelligent than we previously imagined. Autophagy is one example of that. Now, here's where fasting enters the conversation. Scientists have learned that nutrient availability influences many pathways involved in cellular maintenance and recycling. When nutrients are plentiful, cells receive one set of signals, and when nutrients become less available, other pathways become more active. Autophagy appears to be one of those highly regulated processes. Notice my wording: appears to be, because this is where we have to be careful. Much of what we know about autophagy comes from laboratory studies and animal models, and those studies are incredibly valuable. They've taught us a tremendous amount. But translating those findings directly into specific fasting schedules for humans is much more complicated. Human beings are not laboratory mice. We're wonderfully complex. Our age matters, our genetics matter, our medication matters, our activity level matters, our body composition matters, our overall health, it matters. Scientists cannot currently look at someone and say, "Congratulations, you've reached peak autophagy at exactly 23 hours and 14 minutes." That's simply not how the science works. Yet, if you spend enough time online, you'll hear people speak with incredible certainty. Autophagy starts exactly here. Now, the honest answer is we don't know those precise timelines in humans. And I think that's okay. Science isn't weakened by humility, it's strengthened by it. One of the things I've come to appreciate most is that the scientific process is constantly refining itself. Good scientists don't pretend to know everything. They ask better questions, they test ideas, they revise conclusions when new evidence emerges. I think that's a beautiful way to approach health, not with fear, not with blind certainty, and just with curiosity. Now, that doesn't mean autophagy isn't important, quite the opposite. It reminds us that our cells are not static, they're dynamic. They're constantly renewing and constantly repairing and adapting every second of your life, even while you're watching this video. Think about that. Right now, your immune system is identifying potential threats. Your liver is processing nutrients. Your heart has already beaten thousands of times today. Your lungs have exchanged oxygen tens of thousands of times. Your kidneys are right now filtering your blood. Your brain is coordinating billions of electrical signals. Your skin is replacing old cells. Your digestive tract is renewing itself. You are alive because your body is constantly rebuilding itself. Sometimes I think we forget that. We look in the mirror and see ourselves as one unchanging person. Biologically, that's not true at all. You are constantly changing, constantly adapting, constantly renewing. That realization fills me with hope. Because if the body is constantly rebuilding, then perhaps health isn't a fixed destination. Perhaps it's a direction, a continual process of supporting the incredible work the body is already trying to accomplish. That became one of the central ideas behind everything that I teach. I'm not trying to teach people how to control every microscopic process happening inside their cells. None of us can do that. I'm trying to teach you how to create an environment that supports your body's remarkable design. That's a much more realistic goal. It's also a much more helpful one because we actually have influence over many parts of our environment. We can influence what we eat, how often we eat, when we sleep, how we move, how we manage stress, whether we spend time outside, how we nurture our relationships. Now, none of these guarantee perfect health, but they are ways of partnering with the biology we've been given. One of the greatest lessons I've learned is this: the body is always listening. Everything we do, every meal, every night of sleep or lack thereof, every walk outside, or long binge of Netflix on the couch. Every stressful season, every moment of rest becomes information. The body is constantly interpreting those signals. It's not judging you, it's responding. That's why I love the phrase food is information. Food is information. Did you hear me? Food is information. But I would take it one step further. Your entire lifestyle is information. Your body is listening to all of it. And that naturally raises another question. If fasting changes the information we're sending, why did fasting become such a normal part of life throughout so much of human history? Because here's something fascinating. Fasting didn't begin in a laboratory. It didn't begin on social media. It didn't begin with influencers. It didn't begin with medicine. Long before modern science could measure insulin or ketones or autophagy, people all over the world were fasting. Different cultures, different civilizations, different religions, different continents, separated by oceans and thousands of years. Yet somehow they all discovered fasting. Why? That question became one of my favorite parts of researching because the history of fasting tells us something profound about being human. So let's leave the laboratory for a little while and travel back through history. Let's discover where fasting came from and why nearly every civilization has practiced it in one form or another. So for part 2 of this video, we're going to go into the story of fasting through history. So for chapter 7, fasting is older than civilization. Many people hear the word fasting and they immediately think of a trend. Maybe they picture social media or a fitness influencer they've seen, or an intermittent fasting app, or weight loss challenges, or the latest best-selling diet book. And it's easy to assume that fasting is something modern, something recently invented. But the truth is, fasting is probably one of the oldest human experiences there is. Long before there were restaurants, before grocery stores, before refrigerators, before agriculture, before civilization itself, there were human beings. And those human beings didn't have access to food every few hours. Imagine waking up, 5,000 years ago. There is no pantry, no refrigerator, no microwave, no drive-through breakfast, No coffee shops, no smoothie like, no, there's just not. We got a new smoothie king in our town, but, like, those just didn't exist. There were no protein bars in a backpack just waiting for you, and no delivery service that was gonna bring it. If you wanted breakfast, someone had to find breakfast. Some days that happened quickly and others it didn't. Food availability wasn't controlled by a clock. It was influenced by weather, migration, seasons, success, failure. Sometimes there was abundance and sometimes there wasn't. That doesn't mean our ancestors were constantly starving. Far from it. When food was available, they ate. When it wasn't, their bodies relied on the remarkable systems we talked about in the last few chapters. That's not a flaw. That's part of what allowed our species to survive. Think about every wild animal you've ever seen. A lion doesn't hunt because it's exactly 12 o'clock. And a hawk doesn't check its smartwatch. A deer doesn't schedule 6 perfectly balanced meals each day. The rhythms of nature have always included periods of eating and periods without eating. Humans were no different. One of the things I found fascinating in this realization was just how unusual our modern food environment really is. For almost all of human history, constant access to food simply didn't exist. Today, many of us can eat without ever experiencing even mild hunger. If we become slightly uncomfortable, food is only a few steps away. Again, I'm incredibly grateful for that blessing. Many people throughout history prayed for the kind of food security that many of us now enjoy. This isn't about wishing for hardship. It's about recognizing that our biology developed under very different conditions. Sometimes I think we've confused convenience with normal. Convenience is wonderful, but it doesn't automatically mean it's how our bodies evolved. That's an important distinction. Now, let's move forward in history. Eventually, people began farming. Communities formed, civilizations grew, food became more predictable. But something interesting happened. Even though food became more available, fasting didn't disappear. In fact, it became intentional. People didn't fast only because food was unavailable. They fasted because they believed there was value in doing so. Different cultures had different reasons. Sometimes it was preparation, sometimes mourning, sometimes gratitude, sometimes discipline, or sometimes prayer, sometimes community, sometimes healing. The reasons, they really varied, but the practice remained. And I think that's worth paying attention to. Civilizations that had never met each other, living on different continents, often developed traditions involving fasting. Now, that doesn't prove fasting treats disease. It doesn't prove every historical belief about fasting was correct. History isn't the same thing as scientific evidence, but it does raise an interesting question. Why has fasting continued appearing throughout human history? Why didn't it disappear once food became more available? Perhaps because people observed something super valuable. Long before scientists could measure hormones, people noticed that periods without food affected the body, the mind, and often their spiritual lives. Today, modern research is helping us understand some of the biological mechanisms behind those observations. Not all of them, but some of them. It's one of the things I love about scientists. Sometimes it doesn't it's not because they have all the answers in science, but sometimes it doesn't replace ancient wisdom, but it does help to explain it. Now, fasting across faith traditions, let's talk about that because if you've watched many of my videos, you know that my faith is an important part of my life. It shapes how I see the world and it gives me hope. It reminds me that every person has infinite worth. But one of the things I found beautiful while researching fasting is that fasting isn't unique to one religion. Throughout history, people of many different faiths have practiced fasting. Judaism includes days of fasting. Christianity has centuries of fasting traditions. Islam includes the month of Ramadan. Many Buddhists traditions incorporate periods of fasting or mindful eating. Many Hindu traditions include fasting for spiritual purposes. And even outside organized religion, people have voluntarily fasted as acts of reflection or self discipline, mourning, preparation, or gratitude, and different beliefs, different practices, different meanings, but the pattern keeps appearing. Now, as a Christian myself, I find fasting deeply meaningful. Throughout the Bible, we see men and women fasting during seasons of repentance, mourning, seeking wisdom, preparation, gratitude, and prayer. But it's important to understand something. Biblical fasting was never presented as a way to earn God's love. God God's love isn't purchased through hunger. Fasting wasn't spiritual currency. It was a way of creating space, space to quiet distractions and space to focus, space to pray, space to remember what mattered most. One of my favorite things about fasting is that it reminds me how often I reach for food automatically, not because I'm hungry, but because I'm stressed or bored or celebrating or simply following a habit. Those moments have become invitations. Instead of immediately filling every moment of discomfort, I can pause, I can pray, I can reflect, I can ask, what am I really hungry for right now? Sometimes the answer has nothing to do with food. Sometimes I'm hungry for rest. Sometimes I'm hungry for peace. Sometimes I'm hungry for connection, or sometimes I'm hungry for hope. I don't think fasting replaces those things. I think it helps reveal them. That's one reason I wanted my book to be about much more than weight loss, because fasting is much more than a dietary strategy. It's an opportunity to pay attention to your body, your habits, your emotions, and for me, to my relationship with God. Now, whether you're a person of faith or not, I think there's something universally valuable about creating intentional space. We live in a world that constantly demands more notifications, more entertainment, more purchases, more food, more noise. Fasting gently asks a different question. What happens if, for a little while, we create space instead of filling every moment? That's a question worth exploring because while history gives us perspective, science helps us to understand what may be happening inside the body. And that's where we're headed next. We're going to take everything we've learned so far and connect it to what modern research tells us about fasting, metabolism, inflammation, cardiovascular health, brain health, and healthy aging. Not with hype, not with miracle claims, but with careful curiosity. Because the truth is compelling enough on its own. So, for part three, what modern science actually says about fasting, in chapter 8, we're going to separate evidence from excitement. All right, let's see here. Fasting cures everything. Hmm. Fasting is dangerous. Hmm. Fasting for 72 hours restores your body. Eh. Breakfast is the most important meal of the day. Never skip breakfast. Eh. Fasting is the secret to longevity. Eh. Have you ever noticed that in health, everything seems to be presented as an absolute? Something is either a miracle or it's dangerous. It's either the best thing ever discovered or it's completely worthless. There doesn't seem to be much room for the evidence is promising, but we're still learning. Yet that's exactly where science spends most of its time. Real science is wonderfully humble. It asks questions, it tests ideas, it admits uncertainty, and it changes when better evidence becomes available. And honestly, I think that's one of the reasons I love it so much because science isn't trying to protect an opinion. It's trying to discover truth. And as I've researched over the years, I've read hundreds of scientific papers. Some were incredibly encouraging, and some were disappointing, and some contradicted each other. Some raised new questions instead of answering old ones. That's exactly what you'd expect in a field that's still developing. So before we go any further, I want us to make an agreement. Throughout the rest of the video, I'm not going to promise you miracles. I'm not going to tell you fasting cures every disease. I'm not going to tell you you can throw away your doctor. I'm not. I'm not going to tell you that everyone should fast because none of those statements would be honest. Instead, I'm going to tell you what I believe the evidence supports, where the evidence is growing, and what or where scientists are still looking, what they're still asking, and go over some important questions. I think you deserve that. Health is too important for just general exaggerations. So, what we know with the greatest confidence, one of the first things that became clear for me as I studied fasting research is that not every claimed benefit carries the same level of evidence. Some areas are supported by decades of research, and others are intriguing but much less certain. So let's start with what we know best. Fasting changes metabolism. Now, this isn't controversial. When you stop eating, your metabolism changes. Insulin declines, glycogen gradually decreases, and stored fat becomes increasingly important. Ketone production rises during longer fasts. Now, these are well understood physiological responses. They're not theories, they're normal human biology. Fasting can support weight loss. This is probably the most studied area. Many clinical trials have shown that some forms of intermittent fasting can help people lose weight. But here's something interesting. The evidence also suggests that fasting is not necessarily magical compared with other approaches that produce similar calorie reduction. Now, that's important. Fasting isn't the only path. Some people do wonderfully with 3 balanced meals each day. Others thrive with time-restricted eating. Others prefer different approaches. The reason that fasting works for many people may be partly because it naturally reduces eating opportunities. And for some individuals, it makes it easier to maintain an overall calorie deficit. That doesn't make fasting less valuable. It simply helps us understand why it can work. I actually find that encouraging because it reminds us that success isn't about chasing magic. It's about finding sustainable habits that fit your life. So let's discuss blood sugar and metabolic health. It's another area where research is encouraging in metabolic health. Studies suggest that fasting approaches may improve insulin sensitivity and other markers of metabolic health in many people. But here's another important reminder. Those improvements are often influenced by the entire lifestyle. Food quality matters, sleep, physical activity, stress, body weight changes matter. You can't isolate one piece of biology from all the others. Your body doesn't. Everything works together. Cardiovascular health. Researchers have also been studying fasting's effect on heart health. Some studies have found improvements in blood pressure, certain cholesterol measurements, and markers associated with cardiovascular risk. Again, results vary depending on the person and the fasting approach, but overall, this is an area that there's scientists are continuing to study with considerable interest. Now, where the research is exciting but still growing, we're going to move into a territory that I think is incredibly fascinating, but we also need humility. So, with brain health, many people report feeling mentally sharper during fasting. Now, researchers are exploring possible mechanisms involving ketones, cellular stress responses, and neuroplasticity. Animal studies have produced exciting findings. Human research is still growing, but it's still developing. Can fasting support brain health? Possibly, yes. Is every claim you hear online proven? No, of course not. And I think it's okay to say both of those things. Now, healthy aging. Another fascinating area involves longevity. Scientists studying organisms ranging from yeast to worms to rodents have repeatedly observed that dietary restriction and fasting related interventions can influence lifespan under certain conditions. Human beings are much more complicated. We simply don't yet have definitive evidence proving that fasting extends human lifespan. But what we do have are many reasons to keep studying it. Personally, I'm excited by the research, but I'm careful not to promise more than the evidence is supporting. Inflammation. Let's touch on this area because it's especially close to my heart. Because of my own experience with multiple sclerosis, I naturally became interested in inflammation. Researchers have observed changes in inflammatory markers in some fasting studies, and that's encouraging. But inflammation is incredibly complex. It isn't one thing, it's an entire network of immune activity. And while fasting may influence some aspects of inflammation, it's only one piece of a much larger picture. Nutrition, sleep, stress, exercise, body composition, environmental exposures, all of these contribute, which brings me to something I think is incredibly important. I want to share my story. When I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, I wanted answers. I wanted certainty. I wanted someone to hand me a roadmap. Instead, I discovered something else, that health is rarely built in one decision. It's built on thousands of small choices repeated over years. Did fasting become one of the most meaningful tools in my life? Absolutely. I believe it has, and it is. Has healthy nutrition mattered? Absolutely. Movement? Yes. Sleep? Yes. Learning to manage stress? Yes. Spending time outside? Yes. Strengthening my faith? For me, absolutely. None of those by themselves tell the whole story. Together, they change the direction of my life. That's why I've never wanted this channel to become Rebecca discovered one secret, because I didn't. I discovered principles that support the remarkable systems that God built into the human body. Fasting became one of the cornerstones, but it wasn't the entire foundation. I don't want anyone watching this to believe that if they simply fast long enough, every illness disappears. Life is not that simple. I've known wonderful people who did everything right and still became sick. I've known people who never thought about nutrition and lived long lives. Human biology isn't a vending machine where we insert perfect behavior and always receive perfect health. But I do believe this. Every healthy choice is a vote in favor of the body God gave you. Not because it guarantees tomorrow, but because it honors today. And I think that's worth pursuing. The biggest mistake I see, if there is one mistake I see over and over again, it's this. People become so excited about fasting that they forget about eating well. I've been guilty of this myself. They fast and they spend their eating window consuming mostly ultra processed foods. Or they believe fasting somehow erases every other lifestyle habit. That is not how biology works. Imagine someone saying, I'm only going to sleep 4 hours a night, but I'll make up for it by exercising more. What? Those aren't interchangeable. The same is true here. Fasting isn't permission to neglect nutrition. It isn't permission to ignore sleep or movement or relationships or emotional health. Instead, I see fasting as creating space for all of those healthy habits to become even more intentional. It's one instrument in the orchestra, a beautiful instrument, but not the entire symphony. And that's exactly why the next section matters so much. Because now that we understand the science, we need to answer the question everyone eventually asks. How do you actually begin? Not with extremes, not with fear, not by copying someone on YouTube, but by learning to work with your body instead of against it. So for part 4, learning to fast wisely, in chapter 9, we're going to discuss where every beginner should start. If you've made it this far, you may be thinking, okay, Rebecca, I understand the science a little bit better now, but what do I actually do? And I love that question because knowledge is wonderful, but knowledge only changes our lives when we begin putting it into practice. And this is where I want to encourage you. Please Don't start with extremes. One of the biggest mistakes I see is people watching a video of someone completing a 5-day fast or a 7-day or a 30-day and thinking, maybe that's where I should be beginning. I don't believe that's wise. In fact, I think it's one of the reasons many people become discouraged. They just begin assuming that fasting is about seeing how much discomfort they can tolerate. Almost like it's an endurance competition. Who can go the longest without food? Who has the most willpower? Who's the toughest? And I don't believe that's what fasting is all about. The purpose of fasting isn't suffering. The purpose is creating intentional periods where your body has the opportunity to move through the natural rhythms we've been discussing. Those are two different mindsets, very different mindsets. One says, I'm trying to prove something. The other says, I'm trying to partner with my body's design. And I think the second approach leads to much healthier decisions. Start with a fast you're already doing. Here's something that might surprise you. If you sleep tonight, you're already fasting. Think about the word itself. Breakfast. Break fast. The first meal that breaks your overnight fast for most of us, the very first we ever practiced lasting through, like the first real fast, was just sleeping and going overnight without food. Isn't that interesting? We don't usually think of it that way. We simply call it sleeping. But your body doesn't stop working because you're sleeping. Those hours matter. And for many people, one of the healthiest first steps isn't doing anything dramatic. It's simply extending that overnight fast a little bit longer. Maybe instead of eating immediately after waking up, you wait a little while. Maybe you allow your body a little more time before your first meal. And that's very different from deciding tomorrow I'm going to stop eating for 4 days. Small, thoughtful changes are often much more sustainable than big, dramatic ones like that. Remember, our goal isn't to impress people on social media. Our goal is to build habits we can live with for years. Listen to your body, but learn its language. Earlier in this video, I said something that I want you to come back to. Your body speaks biology. The challenge is many of us haven't learned how to interpret the language yet. For example, during the first few days of changing eating habits, you may feel hungry at your usual meal times. Does that automatically mean that your body is in danger? No, not necessarily. Remember ghrelin? That hunger hormone often follows a pattern. Your body learns routines. If you've eaten lunch at noon for 20 years, don't be surprised if your stomach reminds you at noon tomorrow. That's not failure, it's familiarity. The body loves patterns. The encouraging news is that the body can also learn new patterns. Over time, many people find those hunger waves become less intense or shift to match a new routine. Now, again, everyone's experience is different. Some people adjust quickly, others take much longer, and that's okay. This isn't a race. Hydration matters. So, one of the simplest pieces of advice I can give is this: drink enough water. It sounds almost too simple, but dehydration can make people feel tired, headachy, lightheaded, and just generally miserable. Those symptoms are easy to mistake for fasting problems. Sometimes your body is simply asking for water. For many people, plain water works well. Some people also choose like an unsweetened tea of some sort or um, something that is 0 calorie, but you also have, I would recommend avoiding sugar alcohols. So be very wise if you're going to use anything other than water during your fasting approach. Um, the specific approach, it's going to vary depending on your goals and your personal preferences. The important principle is this: you need hydration, support your body, make sure you're drinking enough. Don't neglect it. Breaking a fast matters too. Here's something that doesn't get talked about enough. People spend enormous amounts of time planning the fast and almost no time planning the meal afterward. But how you end a fast matters so much. Imagine running a marathon. Would you immediately sit down and eat the largest meal of your life? Probably not. You'd ease back into normal activity. The same principle often applies here. After long fasts, especially, many people do better beginning with a balanced, nourishing meal instead of immediately overeating. Remember, the goal isn't to punish yourself during the fast and then reward yourself afterward. The goal is to develop a healthier relationship with food altogether, one built on nourishment instead of urgency, gratitude instead of guilt, awareness instead of autopilot. Now, don't chase the longest fast. Can I tell you something I wish more people would say? Longer doesn't automatically mean better. Sometimes I see people almost collecting fasting hours like trophies. I did 48 hours or 72 or 5 days. Again, there are situations where extended fasts are being studied and, in some cases, really valuable for people. But longer isn't inherently healthier. Just like more exercise isn't always better, just like more sleep isn't always better. Health usually lives in balance. One of the things I appreciate most about fasting is that it teaches us restraint. Not only restraint from eating, but restraint from extremes. It reminds us that wisdom often looks surprisingly ordinary, consistent, steady, sustainable. That's the kind of health I want. Not dramatic for a week, transformational over a lifetime. Now let's discuss who should be careful. This part is extremely important. There are people who should not begin fasting on their own. So if you're pregnant, breastfeeding, a growing child or teenager, if you've got a current or past eating disorder, if you have type 1 diabetes or use medications that can significantly lower your blood sugar, or you have another medical condition where fasting could be unsafe, please talk with your healthcare professional before making major changes. Fasting is a tool, and like any tool, it's helpful in the right situation, but no tool is appropriate for every person. One of my hopes is that fasting becomes something people approach thoughtfully, not impulsively. Okay, this is bigger than food. As I continued practicing fasting, something unexpected happened. Yes, my relationship with food changed, but so did my relationship with discomfort. I realized how quickly I wanted to escape even small inconveniences. The moment I felt hungry, I wanted relief. The moment I felt bored, I wanted stimulation. The moment I felt stressed, I wanted distraction. Fasting gently revealed those patterns, not to shame me, but to teach me. It slowed me down enough to ask, what am I really reaching for? Sometimes it was food, or comfort, or certainty, or control. I think fasting has a way of holding up a mirror. It doesn't create those habits, it often reveals them. And once you see them, you have the opportunity to respond differently. It's one of the greatest gifts fasting has given me. Not just metabolic flexibility, but greater self awareness. Because lasting health isn't only about changing what's on your plate, it's also about changing what happens in your heart, your mind, your habits, and your daily rhythms. Which brings us to one of the most important lessons I share in my book and in this video. It is that fasting isn't something you do. It's part of the kind of person you're becoming. Someone who lives intentionally, someone who listens before reacting, someone who respects the remarkable body they've been given. It's someone who understands that health isn't built in one dramatic moment, but in thousands of ordinary decisions made with wisdom and consistency. And that's exactly where I want to take you next, because fasting is only one piece of a much bigger picture. Let's talk about the lifestyle that allows fasting to flourish, not as an isolated practice, but as part of a life that truly supports health. Chapter 10 is that fasting is a foundation, not the whole house. When people hear me talk about fasting, sometimes they assume I believe fasting is the answer to everything. And I don't. I believe fasting is one of the most important lifestyle tools available to us, but it's still a tool. Imagine someone deciding they're going to build a beautiful home. The first thing they do is pour a strong concrete foundation. That's important, incredibly important. But imagine if they stopped there. No walls, no roof, no plumbing, no windows, no electricity, no doors. Would anyone say they had a house? Of course not. A foundation is essential, but a foundation isn't the whole home. That's how I think about fasting. It's one of the foundations, not the entire structure. If we're serious about supporting our health, we have to look at the whole picture. Nutrition, movement, sleep, stress, relationships, purpose, time outside, strength training, hydration, joy, faith, recovery. Our bodies do not separate these things. Neither should we. One of the most beautiful discoveries that I've made during my own health journey is that the body is incredibly interconnected. It is, I promise you. Everything influences everything else. Sleep affects hunger. Stress affects digestion. Exercise affects insulin sensitivity. Relationships influence stress hormones. Sunlight influences circadian rhythms. Movement influences your mood. Nutrition influences energy. The body doesn't have isolated departments. It has integrated systems. Sometimes we search for one missing supplement, one miracle food, one magic fasting schedule, when the answer is often found in gently improving many areas at once, not perfectly, just consistently. The food we eat still matters. I want to say something that may surprise some people. You cannot outfast a consistently unhealthy diet. I know that's not the most exciting thing to hear, but I believe it's true. If fasting creates a window of opportunity, what we do during our eating window still matters tremendously. Remember what we talked about earlier. Food is information. Every meal communicates with your body. The question isn't simply, did I fast today? The question is also, what information did I send my body when I did eat? I don't want people living in fear of food. I don't want you analyzing every bite with anxiety. Food should still be joyful. Meals should still bring families together. Celebration should still be celebrated. But I also believe that the closer we eat to the way food exists in nature, the more we're generally supporting the remarkable systems we've been talking about. Colorful vegetables, quality proteins, healthy fats, fruit, legumes, nuts, seeds, foods that our great grandparents would recognize, not because every processed food is automatically harmful, but because whole foods often bring along something processed foods can't fully replicate. Fiber, phytonutrients, micronutrients, natural food structures, thousands of compounds that we're still discovering. The more I studied nutrition, the more I realized something very humbling. Nature is incredibly sophisticated, much more sophisticated than we often give it credit for. Let's also talk about movement, because movement is medicine, not punishment. Let's talk about exercise. Actually, I prefer the word movement because movement reminds us that our bodies were designed to move, not necessarily to become elite athletes, not because everyone enjoys running marathons and not because everyone wants to lift heavy weights. That's okay. But all of us benefit from moving, walking, stretching, gardening, playing with children or grandchildren, carrying groceries, hiking, swimming, dancing in the kitchen, strength training if we want to. Movement tells the body something important. You are needed. Our muscles respond, our bones respond, our cardiovascular system responds, and our brain responds. Again, the body listens. One of the biggest changes I made personally wasn't becoming obsessed with exercise. It was simply becoming more intentional about moving every day. Sometimes that's enough to begin changing the direction of your health. Sleep. Let's talk about the forgotten superpower. If I could convince every person watching this video to prioritize one habit, it might actually be sleep. Sleep is extraordinary. Think about what happens while you sleep. Your brain is organizing memories, hormones shift, tissues repair, the immune system carries out such important work, growth and maintenance continues. You don't earn points for sleeping less. In our culture, being busy has almost become like a badge of honor. I only slept 4 hours. I've been working nonstop. Sometimes we almost brag about exhaustion, but exhaustion isn't a trophy. Your body wasn't designed to run endlessly without rest. Even the earth follows rhythms of light and darkness. Even your heart rests between beats. Rest isn't laziness, it's part of how life was designed. Fasting taught me that. Ironically, so did sleep. Sometimes healing doesn't begin with doing more. Sometimes it begins with allowing the body the opportunity to do what it has wanted to do all along. Stress changes biology, so let's touch on this. It's one area I wish more people talked about. Stress isn't just something we feel. Stress changes physiology. If you've ever been startled, you've experienced this. Your heart rate raises, your breathing changes, your muscles tighten, your pupils can dilate. Hormones shift. Those responses are incredibly helpful during true emergencies. But what happens when our bodies experience that response day after day, month after month, year after year? Researchers continue studying the effects of chronic stress on many aspects of health. And while we don't have all the answers, I think most of us intuitively know this, that living under constant pressure affects us. That's one reason I began taking quiet moments much more seriously. Walking outside, praying, reading, grounding, connecting with the earth, reading scriptures or a good book, deep breathing, putting the phone down, spending time with people we love, laughing, watching a sunset, playing with my dogs. Right now, dog, because poor Bel Air passed away. Bel Air was my new puppy who we lost earlier than we should have, too. That's a whole separate thing. But being able to experience these moments, the stressful and the good, and sitting with them. These aren't wasted moments, they're investments. Your nervous system notices this, your body notices. Sometimes the healthiest thing we can do isn't add another supplement. Sometimes it's just creating a little more peace. Your health is not a performance. Can I tell you something I hope you'll never forget? Ready for this? Okay. Your health journey isn't a competition. Mhm. It's not about becoming healthier than someone else. It's not about having the longest fast, the lowest body fat percentage, the most perfect meal plan, or checking every wellness box. It's about becoming the healthiest version of you. That looks different for every person. Sometimes people are rebuilding after years of illness. Someone might be healthy but caring for aging parents, or raising small children, or recovering from surgery. Some are grieving, some are living with chronic disease. Your starting point matters. Grace matters. Progress matters. Comparison rarely helps. One of the greatest gifts fasting gave me wasn't simply physical. It reminded me to slow down enough to appreciate the journey, to notice small victories, to celebrate consistency instead of perfection, because perfection is impossible. Consistency is transformational. This is where my story comes in. Everything we've talked about so far has been grounded in physiology, history, and science. But eventually, this stopped being something I was simply studying. It became deeply personal. Because while I was learning about insulin and ketones and fasting, I was also living with a diagnosis that had completely changed the direction of my life. This wasn't an academic exercise for me. This was my search for hope. Not false hope, not miracle promises, real hope. The kind of hope that says, maybe there are things I can do today that help me care for the body I've been given. And that's the story I want to share with you next. Not because my story is the standard everyone else should follow, but because it's the reason this channel exists and that I wrote my book. It's the reason that I'm doing this and I'm sitting here talking to you. Part 5 is my journey with multiple sclerosis. Chapter 11, the diagnosis that changed everything. There are moments in life when life quietly divides itself into two chapters, before and after. For me, one of those moments happened in a neurologist's office. I still remember that day. I mean, not every tiny detail, but the feeling, the waiting, the uncertainty. My mom was with me because my husband was working that day, so it was just the three of us. My mom, my baby daughter, and me. We waited for hours. I remember holding my little girl and trying to be present with her while my mind was racing, and I had been experiencing symptoms that didn't make sense, like numbness and changes in sensation and weakness, just balance problems. And I knew something wasn't right. I just didn't know what. And eventually the neurologist called us back, and she was kind, professional, thorough. She checked my reflexes. She watched me walk. She performed some balance tests, and then she turned toward the MRI images on her computer. And she explained that there were lesions in my brain and in my upper spinal cord. And she gently told me, "You have multiple sclerosis." And even saying those words today takes me back. At that moment, I was thinking about, ugh, I wasn't thinking about medical journals, and I wasn't thinking about immune cells, and I wasn't thinking about inflammation. I was thinking about my daughter. Would I watch her grow up? Would I be able to play with her? Would I eventually need someone to take care of me? The neurologist explained what doctors understood at the time, and based on the number, the size, and the location of my lesions, she believed there was a significant possibility that over the next several years I would experience severe disability. She wasn't trying to be cruel. She was trying to prepare me. She was sharing the best information available to her. But I walked out of that office feeling like someone had handed me a future I didn't want. And if you've ever received a difficult diagnosis, you probably understand that sometimes the hardest part isn't the disease, it's the story you begin telling yourself afterwards. It's the picture that your mind paints and the future you suddenly imagine. For a while, fear became part of my daily life. Every new symptom made me wonder, is this it? Is this the beginning? Every stumble, every numb sensation, every strange tingling, it felt loaded with meaning. And I found myself waiting for my body to fail. Maybe some of you know exactly what that feels like. Maybe your diagnosis wasn't multiple sclerosis. Maybe it was diabetes, heart disease, cancer, and some other autoimmune condition. Or maybe you don't have a diagnosis at all because that's just as difficult and real. Maybe you're simply exhausted. Maybe you've spent years feeling like something isn't right, but no one can seem to explain why. I've been there, and whatever brought you here, I want you to know something. I understand what it feels like to search desperately for hope, real hope, not empty promises and not false guarantees with all kinds of dollar signs attached to it, but hope, rooted in truth, because that's exactly what I was searching for. I was looking for more than another diet. And at first, I did what most people do. I looked for answers. I read everything I could. I talked with doctors and specialists and neurologists, and I learned about medications and I learned about multiple sclerosis. I tried to understand what was happening inside my own body. And I'm grateful for medicine. I'm grateful for neurologists. I'm grateful for MRI technology. And I'm grateful for what we understand far more about MS today than we did decades ago, even 2 decades ago when my journey started. Medical care matters. It saves lives. It improves lives. And I want to say that clearly because I never want my message to be misunderstood. My book and my videos and my channel is not about choosing between medicine and lifestyle. For many people, those work together. But over time, I realized there was another question I wanted answered. Not, what medication can I take? I also wanted to know, how can I support the body God gave me? Those are different questions. One asks how to treat disease. The other asks how to care for health. And I became fascinated by that second question because regardless of someone's diagnosis, isn't that a worthwhile question? How can I better nourish my body? How can I sleep better? How can I move more? How can I lower unnecessary stress? How can I give my body the building blocks it needs? How can I create an environment that supports healing and resilience? And that's when everything began changing. And it wasn't overnight, like I've said. It wasn't in one dramatic moment, but one decision at a time. Small decisions changed the direction of my life. Looking back, I think one of the biggest misconceptions we have about transformation is that it happens all at once. We imagine one breakthrough, one life-changing diet or great cleansing weekend or perfect supplement. My experience wasn't like that. Mine looked much more ordinary. Just healthier meals, one more walk, one decision to keep learning, trying to sleep better, one decision to keep showing up, one fast, then another, one small choice after another. None of them seem extraordinary on their own, but together, over months and then years, they've completely changed the trajectory of my life. It's one reason I have so much hope for people, not because I think every illness disappears, but because I know small decisions accumulate. Just like poor health habits accumulate, healthy habits do too. Every healthy meal, every walk, every good night, every time you choose water instead of another sugary drink, every time you step outside or you strength train, every time you pause and breathe before stress takes over, those choices matter. And sometimes we don't see the results immediately, but biology is keeping the score. Your body remembers consistency. So I want to discuss why fasting became the cornerstone. As I continued learning, there was one practice that I did keep returning to, and that was fasting. It's not because it solved every problem, but because it seemed to influence so many different systems at once. It changed the way I thought about food. It taught me patience. It taught me discipline. It helped me become more aware of my habits. It reminded me that hunger isn't always an emergency, and it helped me appreciate food instead of taking it for granted. It encouraged me to pray more intentionally, and it gave me opportunities to slow down. It just fit naturally alongside the other healthy changes that I was making. And that's why I often describe fasting as the cornerstone of my health journey. Not the entire building, but the cornerstone. Everything else seems to organize around it. When I fasted intentionally, I also became more intentional about what I ate. I became more intentional about hydration and about the things we've discussed, like sleep and movement, gratitude and prayer. Fasting became a rhythm that reminded me to live more intentionally. That doesn't mean it will look exactly the same for you. Your story isn't my story. Your health isn't my health. Your body isn't my body. But I hope my experience encourages you to ask a powerful question. It is this: what small decision could I make or could I begin making today that my future self will thank me for? Because that's where transformation usually begins, not with perfection, but with the next wise decision. You know, sometimes people ask me, Rebecca, do you think fasting healed your multiple sclerosis? And my answer is probably not the answer they're expecting, because I don't think that's actually the right question. The better question is, how do we define healing? And that's where I'd like to spend the next part of this conversation, because I think our culture often has a very narrow definition of what healing looks like. And I believe it's much bigger, much richer, and much more hopeful than we sometimes realize. So for chapter 12, what healing really means. One of the hardest things about receiving a diagnosis is that we often begin thinking in only two categories. Either I'm cured or I'm not. Either I'm healthy or I'm sick. Either I win or I lose. Life rarely fits into categories that neat. The longer I've lived, the more I've realized healing is often much bigger than curing. Now, don't misunderstand me. If someone is cured of a disease, that's wonderful. And we celebrate it. We pray for that. We hope for that. But healing is something much broader. I've met people who were medically cured, yet still lived with fear, bitterness, or hopelessness. I've also met people living with chronic illnesses who radiated peace, purpose, joy, and hope. Which one was healing? Maybe. In different ways, both were. Healing isn't only what happens on an MRI or a blood test or a laboratory. Healing also happens in relationships and in the mind and in the heart. Healing happens when we forgive or when we find purpose again. When we stop believing our diagnosis is the most important thing about us. That realization changed my life because for years I thought my diagnosis was my identity. I wasn't Rebecca anymore. I was the woman with MS. Everything became filtered through those two letters. Every symptom, every decision, every future plan, until one day I realized something. Multiple sclerosis is something that I have. It is not who I am. That's a very important difference. My identity isn't found in a diagnosis. It's found in being a daughter of God, a wife, a mother, a friend, a health coach, a woman who loves learning, someone who still has purpose, someone who still has gifts to offer the world. A diagnosis can change your life. It doesn't have to define your worth. I wish someone had told me that 20 years ago. Now, hope is not the same as certainty. It's another lesson I learned. It's that hope and certainty are not the same thing. When I was first diagnosed, I desperately wanted certainty. I wanted someone to tell me exactly what my future would look like, exactly what would happen, exactly when and how. Life doesn't usually work that way. Medicine can estimate, research can identify patterns, doctors can explain probabilities, but probabilities are not promises, neither good ones or bad ones. I think about that neurologist often. She cared about me. She wasn't trying to discourage me. She was explaining what she understood based on the medical knowledge available to her at the time. I'm grateful for her honesty, but I'm also grateful that statistics don't know my name. Statistics describe groups. They don't determine individual destinies. That truth gave me incredible freedom. Not freedom to ignore reality, but freedom to stop believing my future had already been written. Instead, I decided to focus on the part I could influence. I couldn't control every outcome, but I could influence my habits, my nutrition, my movement, my sleep, my mindset, my response. That's where I chose to invest my energy. So let's talk about the difference between control and stewardship. I think sometimes we use the word control when what we really mean is stewardship. I can't control my genetics. I can't control every environmental exposure. I can't control every illness. I certainly can't control tomorrow, but I can be a good steward of today. I can nourish my body. I can move it. I can rest it. I can strengthen it. I can spend time with people I love. I can keep learning and growing and praying. I can choose gratitude. Those choices don't guarantee outcomes, but they absolutely influence the direction of my life. That mindset removed an enormous amount of pressure. Instead of trying to control everything, I simply tried to become faithful with what had been entrusted to me, including my own body. Your body is not the enemy. If there's one message I hope echoes through every page of this book and every minute of this video, it's this: your body is not your enemy. Now, our bodies can absolutely become sick. Bodies can develop diseases and get injured. Bodies age. They're affected by genetics, infections, trauma, toxins, and just countless other influences. I'm not pretending those realities don't exist, but even in illness, your body is usually trying to survive. Think about inflammation. People often hear that word and assume inflammation is bad, but inflammation itself is part of the body's protective response. The problem isn't that inflammation exists. The problem can arise when inflammatory responses become excessive, prolonged, or misdirected. Your immune system wasn't created to harm you. It was created to protect you. Sometimes those systems become dysregulated and begin responding in ways we don't fully understand. Those are important distinctions. It's one that changed the way I viewed my own diagnosis. Instead of imagining my body as broken beyond repair, I began seeing it as a body still working incredibly hard every single day. My heart was still beating, my lungs were still breathing, my liver was still doing its job, kidneys still filtering my blood. Millions of cells were still repairing themselves, even with illness. My body is still fighting for me. Yours is too. That perspective filled me with gratitude because gratitude changes the way that we care for things. Like, think about it. When you really care for something and appreciate it, like a brand new car or a new shirt or a new, just something you care about, you're likely going to take better care of it. That's how I began viewing my health, not as a battle against my body, but as a partnership with it. What I wish every person understood, if I could sit down with every person who's just been diagnosed with a chronic illness, this is what I would want to tell them. Take a deep breath. Your story isn't over. You don't have to figure everything out today, and you don't have to become an expert overnight. You don't have to become perfect. You simply need to begin. One healthy choice, then another, then another. Don't underestimate small changes. Don't underestimate consistency. And don't underestimate hope. And please, don't underestimate your body's incredible capacity to adapt. Not because adaptation guarantees a cure, but because adaptation is one of the defining characteristics of life itself. Think about it. Every scar is evidence that your body tried to heal. Every broken bone that mended, every infection you recovered from, every wound that closed reminds us that healing is woven into human biology. That doesn't mean every condition resolves, but it does mean that your body has never stopped working on your behalf. What an incredible gift. When I first started researching fasting, I thought I was learning about food. I had no idea I was actually learning about the human body. And the more I learned about the body, the more I stood in awe of its design, which leads us to what may be the biggest lesson of this book. I know I keep saying that because it's all important. After years of studying metabolism, nutrition, physiology, and my own journey, I don't believe that fasting is really about food. I think it's about something much deeper. It's about creating space. It's space for the body to do what it was designed to do, space for the mind to slow down, space for gratitude, space for prayer, sp- space to remember that more is not always better. And that brings us to the final chapter, the chapter that ties everything together, the chapter that answers the question, so where do we go from here? This is part 6, chapter 13. This is giving you a new way of living. And your invitation is this. It's the beginning of a different way of thinking about your health. When I first began writing my book, I thought I was writing about fasting, but somewhere along the journey, I realized I wasn't, not really. I was writing about hope. I was writing about the incredible intelligence of the human body. I was writing about learning to stop fighting ourselves and instead learning to work with the design that we've been given. I was writing about slowing down in a world that constantly tells us to hurry. I was writing about remembering that health isn't built in dramatic moments. It's built on ordinary Tuesdays and ordinary breakfasts and ordinary walks, ordinary bedtimes and ordinary prayers, ordinary conversations around the dinner table. Extraordinary lives are almost always built from ordinary faithfulness. Now, that may not be the message that social media wants to hear. Social media wants overnight transformation and 30-day miracles and one secret trick and one supplement, one food. But life usually doesn't work that way. Neither does biology. The human body changes one cell at a time. One habit, one day, one decision at a time. And honestly, I'm thankful for that because it means every single day you have another opportunity. You don't have to wait until January 1st and you don't have to wait till Monday. You don't have to wait until you've bought all the right supplements or the perfect exercise equipment or the newest wearable gadget. You can begin today, not perfectly, just intentionally. Your body has been trying to protect you. If you've watched this entire video, I hope that you don't forget this. Your body has been trying to protect you your entire life. Think about everything it's done for you. It's healed cuts you don't remember getting. It's fought infections while you slept. It repaired muscles after you exercised. It strengthened bones after you walked. It learned, adapted, adjusted, recovered every single day. Even during seasons when you weren't paying attention, your body never stopped paying attention to you. I think that's beautiful. Sometimes we speak about our bodies with incredible frustration, like my body hates me, my body betrayed me, or my body is broken. I understand those feelings. I felt them. But today, I'd like to offer another possibility. What if your body has been doing the very best it can with the information, the environment, and the resources it has been given? That doesn't explain every illness. It doesn't answer every question, but it changes the conversation. Instead of anger, we begin with gratitude. And instead of blame, we begin with curiosity. Instead of fighting our bodies, we begin asking, how can I support you? That one question changed my life. What fasting has taught me? Hmm. People often ask me, Rebecca, what's the biggest thing fasting has taught you? And honestly, it isn't about fat burning. Ugh, it's also not about ketones. It's also not about autophagy. I mean, those things are fascinating, but they aren't the biggest lesson. The biggest lesson is this. I don't need to respond to every impulse, every craving, every discomfort, every emotion, every fear. I can pause. I can breathe. I can pray. I can think. And I can choose. That lesson reaches far beyond food. It changes the way we speak, the way we parent, the way we love, the way we spend money, the way we respond to stress, the way we make decisions. Fasting becomes one of the greatest teachers of intentional living I've ever experienced. Not because it took food away, because it gave awareness back. And awareness is often where transformation begins. Let me share my hope for you. Maybe you're watching this today because you want to lose weight. I'm glad you're here. Maybe you're hoping to improve metabolic health. I'm glad you're here. Maybe you're living with an autoimmune disease like I am. I'm especially glad you're here. Maybe you're simply exhausted, confused, discouraged, or wondering if your healthiest years are already behind you. I want you to hear this. There is still hope. Not because I know exactly what your future holds, I don't, but because it's not because I can promise a cure. I can't. But because every single day gives you another opportunity to care for the body you've been given. Hope isn't pretending life is easy. Hope is believing your next decision still matters. And it does. It always does. I've been asked why I spend so much time writing a book, and the answer is simple. Because this conversation is too important for a single YouTube video. There was so much more I wanted to share. More science, more history, more practical guidance, stories, encouragement, more of the questions people ask. I wanted one place where someone could sit down, highlight pages, write notes in the margins, and come back 6 months later to continue learning. That's why my book exists. It's going to be published any moment. It's just waiting for approval. I don't have all the answers, but I wanted to create a trusted companion for people who are trying to understand fasting with both curiosity and wisdom. If today's conversation encouraged you, then I think you'll enjoy going deeper in the book. It's where I expand on these ideas, include additional research, I share practical strategies, and walk step by step through the principles we've talked about today. And before we finish, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for spending time with me. Time is one of the most valuable gifts any of us have. The fact that you've stayed through this conversation means more than you realize. Whether you ever watch another one of my videos or you read another page that I've written, I sincerely hope this conversation changes the way you see yourself. Because I don't believe you're fragile and I don't believe you're beyond hope. I don't believe your body is your enemy. I believe your body is extraordinary. I believe it was created with incredible wisdom. I believe it deserves nourishment, movement, rest, compassion, patience, and I believe you're worth it. That's actually where the name of this channel came from. youareworthithhealth.com is my website because you are worth it. Not because you've earned it, not because you've reached a certain weight, not because your lab work is perfect, not because you've never made mistakes. You're worth it because your life has value. And I hope every video I ever create reminds you of that truth. If you enjoyed this video, I'd love for you to subscribe and join me for the rest of the fasting project. This is episode 18 and I'm going to keep making more. We're continuing this journey together, exploring fasting, nutrition, metabolism, practical health habits, and the science of supporting the incredible body you've been given. If you'd like to go even deeper, check out my book. It'll be available on Amazon. The link is in the description below. And like I said, you should visit my website. I truly hope it becomes a guide you can return to again and again. And if you know someone who's overwhelmed by all the conflicting health advice out there, would you consider sharing this video with them? Sometimes one conversation at the right moment can change the direction of someone's life. Thank you for being here. Until next time, take care of yourself. Take care of the people you love and never Stop learning. I'll see you in the next episode.